Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to look at the Leaving Cert poem Problems by Julie O Callaghan. O'Callaghan was born in Chicago in 1954. She has lived in Ireland since 1974 and she lives in Naas, County Kildare now. Something to think about in pairs. Did you ever have a garden at the back of your house? What are the problems associated with keeping a garden? Do you know anyone who worries about absolutely everything? Stanza 1. Problems. Take weeds for example, like how they will overrun your garden and your life if you don't obliterate them. Take weeds for example. The poem starts off mid-conversation with another person and she's saying, take weeds for example, think about weeds, unwanted plants that grow in your garden, like how they will overrun your garden and your life. Overrun, to spread over or occupy a place in large numbers, to conquer or occupy our territory by force. So she's saying that weeds will take over your garden and your life. Here, weeds are like a metaphor for problems. Problems and thinking and overthinking about your problems will overrun your mind and your life. They will take over your entire life. If you don't obliterate them, if you don't destroy them, utterly wipe them out, cause them to become invisible or distinct, to erase, delete, wipe out. So basically, if you don't stop the weeds in your garden, they're going to completely take over your garden. And that's like a metaphor. If you don't stop overthinking and be full of problems, problems are going to take over your life unless you delete them. So a summary of lines 1 to 4, problems like weeds can completely dominate your life unless you deal with them and get rid of them. Stanza 2. But forget about weeds. What about leaves? Snails use them as handy bridges to your flowers, and hordes of thuggish slugs will invade. Ever thought about that? Again, it's conversational, chatty style. She says, but forget about weeds. Let's go on to something else that causes problems in our gardens. What about leaves? Snails use them as handy bridges to your flowers. So leaves might be wonderful, but snails are crawling along the leaves just to get to your flowers. They are using the leaves as bridges, as a means of transport almost, to get over and eat all your lovely flowers. And hordes of thuggish slugs will invade. A horde is a large group or crowd, a swarm, a horde of mosquitoes. So she's saying slugs will invade your garden. Hordes, like big gangs of thuggish slugs. Thuggish. If you describe a person or their behaviour as thuggish, you mean they behave in a violent, rough or threatening way. Slugs are these guys. So basically she describes the slugs as thuggish slugs. Ugh, ugh. This sound of ugh shows a sense of deep disgust, ugh, experienced by the poet. These slugs, she said, will invade our garden. Now, invade is a very strong word. It could be used to enter a country or a region so as to occupy it. So she imagines like an army of slugs, rough thugs of slugs coming in to invade your garden. Ever thought about that? So like she's asking questions, but obviously she doesn't give the speaker any chance to answer. Perhaps she's talking to us and she wants us to answer, kind of like a rhetorical question. So a summary of lines 5 to 10. Ugh sound in slug. She sounds hopeless. She feels as if her problems are invading her in hordes, in large groups. So she feels like the leaves are invading her, the slugs are invading her, just like problems are invading her mind. It's like an army of problems invading her mind. Stanza 3. We won't even go into how leaves block up the gutters. I sure hope you aren't neglecting any puddles of water in your bathtub. Discoloration will set in. We won't even go into. So again, it's as if she's talking to another speaker. We won't go into that, meaning we will not discuss that. How leaves block up the gutters. The gutters is this part of the house where water is collected, and leaves in winter can block up your gutters. Again, if leaves are symbols of problems in the garden, and if leaves are a metaphor for problems in our life, block up our gutters. I don't know why I'm getting the analogy to something like blocking up the arteries of your heart from all the stress of worrying about your problems. I sure hope you aren't neglecting. To neglect, to fail to care for properly. The old churchyard had been sadly neglected. So she's saying, I sure hope you aren't neglecting any puddles of water in your bathtub. Some old gardens may have old thrown out bathtubs, and over time this bathtub can fill up with rainwater. This bathtub again could be a metaphor for our brain, and the more problems we allow into our brain, the more dirty and muddy and cloudy our thinking becomes. If we don't look after our bathtub, our brain, our mind, discoloration will set in. The colour will change, just like our mind will become dirty and cloudy as well. So we need to be careful. So a summary of lines 11 to 15. The leaves that block the gutters could be a metaphor for how problems block happiness getting into our hearts. If you ignore your problems, they will cause a dark colour or sadness in your heart, possibly even disease, or possibly even depression. Next stanza. There is the WASP problem, the storms problem, the grass growing between the bricks in the driveway problem. Then there's remembering to lock all the windows problems. My God, this woman doesn't stop with her problems. So, she said, other problems we have in our garden, the WASP problems, well, they can sting us. Again, those wasps might be a metaphor for people who hurt us. The storms problems, yes, trees and leaves and flowers can get blown down in our garden, get blown down if there are storms. Perhaps we all have storms in our life when things don't go the way we want them to. There's the grass growing between the bricks in the driveway problem. Yes, that's one annoying problem that definitely happens with gardens. We have to keep removing them with weed killer and with some tools. Again, grass growing between the bricks in the driveway could be like cracks in our lives, and the kind of problems are coming out, the signs that we are perhaps mentally affected by all our problems. And then, if you own a garden or a house, there's the remembering to lock all the windows problem. This could be somebody with a little bit of OCD, always checking to see are the doors and windows locked. So a summary of lines 16 to 20. This quick list of problems shows us that life indeed is full of problems, and they can overrun us, they can overpower us. I mean, we're all given a garden, and the garden is a symbol for life. But if we're constantly looking around for the next worst thing to happen, the wasps, the leaves, the storms, forgetting to lock the window. It's like we're always on edge looking around to see where is the next problem coming from, and it will actually overpower us and we'll go mad in the end. Final stanza. Hey knuckleheads, I guess you just don't appreciate how many problems there are. Hey knuckleheads. Again, we know this poet spent 20 years in America and then she moved to Ireland. So knuckleheads would be like slang for a stupid person, a fool or an idiot. So the poet is calling everyone reading this poem who doesn't worry about problems. She goes, you guys who are not worrying about problems, you are knuckleheads. You're idiots. There's so many problems to worry about. Wake up. You need to worry about your problems. I guess you just don't appreciate how many problems there are. She's saying to the readers, I think you don't recognize the full worth, or you're not grateful for all these problems that you have. She's almost telling people who don't worry that they're stupid for not worrying, and they should appreciate how many problems there are. They need to wake up and see how many problems there are. But that's because it's her way of thinking. She sees the world as full of problems. She sees the world as a place full of problems. But not everyone thinks like that. But she thinks they're the crazy ones. So a summary of lines 21 to 23. The speaker in the poem is actually rude, as she calls people who are not obsessed with small problems knuckleheads. Theme or main message from this poem. Worrying too much about minor problems can take over your life and become an obsession, and this is dangerous. Be careful. The language in the poem. Note the sudden opening of the poem, which gives the impression that a conversation is taking place. The language in this poem is conversational or chatty in tone and follows the patterns of normal speech. Questions are used, but the listener is never given the opportunity to reply. This suggests that the speaker in the poem is arrogant and has strong opinions. So just a few questions to think about. There are many problems listed in the poem, and you could list them all like this. Firstly, secondly, another problem is, in addition, also, and finally. You could use point, quote, explain. Question 1b. I think the effect of the poet's use of informal language is as follows. Informal language, chatty language. So you could just give some examples there of examples of chatty language to show that she's in the middle of a conversation. She uses questions, and what's the effect of this? Another question. I think the poet likes or doesn't like her garden for the following reasons. First of all, point, quote, explain. Secondly, and finally.